Thank you all for joining us at the Community IT Innovators webinar. Today, we're going to walk through a new AI framework put together through the research of Project Evident and Technology Association for Grantmakers. And this is based on surveys of practitioners and their own research, and TAG and Project Evident have created a guideline for thinking about introducing AI tools and concepts to your nonprofit organization or philanthropy. So today they're going to share their results with us and help us think about the needs AI can address, the policies our organizations need to put in place, and ethical areas where nonprofits can make a difference in the development and use of these tools. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT and the moderator today, and I'm very happy to hear from our experts. But first, I'm going to go over our learning objectives. So in this session, we're hoping that by the end of this session, you'll be able to learn the definitions of AI and generative AI and the differences, understand the framework, the design principles used in the framework, discuss the ways AI is being used in philanthropy, individual use, organizational use, and mission attainment, and review the considerations, organizational, ethical, and technical. And they have an amazing graphic that they're going to share with us that kind of helps walk you through those different aspects of AI. But before we begin, if you're not familiar with Community IT, just a little bit about us. We are a 100% employee-owned managed services provider. We provide outsourced IT support, and we work exclusively with nonprofit organizations. Our mission is to help nonprofits accomplish their missions through the effective use of technology. So we are big fans of what well-managed IT can do for your nonprofit. We serve nonprofits across the US. We've been doing this for over 20 years, and we are technology experts. We are consistently given an MSP 501 recognition for being a top MSP, which is an honor we received again in 2023. So I want to remind everyone that for these presentations, Community IT is vendor agnostic. So we only make recommendations to our clients and only based on their specific business needs. We never try to get a client into a product because we get an incentive or benefit from that. But we do consider ourselves a best of breed IT provider. So it's our job to know the landscape, the tools that are available, reputable, and widely used. And we make recommendations on that basis for our clients based on their business needs, priorities, and budget. And you can imagine we have a lot of clients asking us about AI, so I'm very happy for this presentation today. And now I'm so excited to hear from our experts. So Jean, would you like to introduce yourself and the AI project at TAG?
I would be delighted. Thank you so much. Hello and welcome, everyone. I am Jean Westrick. I am the newly appointed Executive Director for the Technology Association of Grantmakers. I'm just about sort of closing in on my first 90 days here at TAG. And I am really pleased to be sharing the framework for responsible adoption in philanthropy with you today. Go to the next slide. So for folks who don't know, TAG is a membership association, and we focus on stewarding the strategic, innovative, and equitable uses of technology in philanthropy. Our work builds on knowledge within our sector. It strengthens networks through these opportunities to bring members together and share what they're doing and advance organizational practice. And we also provide thought leadership for the social sector and the philanthropy community writ large. So I'm really excited to be here as the voice of philanthropy tech. And we have members actually across the globe, in North America, as well as in Europe and in the UK. We believe that technology is not only critical to executing the business of philanthropy, the work that we do every day, and nonprofits as well. I mean, every organization is essentially a technology organization. And every organization recognizes the strategic imperative of technology in the way in which we deliver our missions. It's often the way we connect with our constituents. And so with that, bringing together all of these groups, we're really thinking about ways in which we can meet the practical needs, the pragmatic needs of those folks every day who are trying to keep the lights on and navigate these decisions, with also the organizational innovations that happen as well through technology. So I'm really pleased to be here to share a little bit about our mission and this framework. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my co-presenter and colleague, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Jean. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in dialogue with all of you about AI. I'm Sarah Di Troia. I'm a senior advisor in product innovation for Project Evident. We're a nonprofit. We are also excited about the use of technology, but for us, technology is a means to an end, and that end is stronger outcomes for communities. And so our focus is really on data, and we see AI as a way to be able to gather new types of data, analyze data, and make it really actionable for communities and for folks who are on the front lines of organizations and foundations. So all of our missions can be achieved. It's really been a delight partnering with the TAG Foundation, TAG organization over this last year, developing the framework and with so many members of the TAG community. And if there are any of you who are listening that were part of our workshops, just really want to thank you so much for contributing to the development of this framework.
Thank you. So as Sarah mentioned, this framework was the result of a lot of input from a lot of different folks. I want to just take a minute to actually recognize the AI framework team, Kelly Fitzsimmons and Sarah from Project Evident, as well as Gozi Abuanu, who's here on the call today, and my predecessor, Chantel Forrester, who's really had a lot of foresight to help kick off this project and lead this work. This framework was based upon the input of nearly 300 practitioners, leaders, and partners throughout the social sector. And it is our hope that this framework will really help folks navigate this evolving landscape of AI with some informed optimism, to be able to evaluate when it's going to be the right decision and when it's not. At tagtech.org/AI, you'll be able to download the framework as well as additional resources that we've put out with regards to that. It's interesting how fast this landscape has evolved. Few in the philanthropy sector were even really talking about AI, a year ago, and now it seems to be everywhere on everyone's lips, and it only continues to evolve faster and faster, it seems. In April of last year, almost a year ago, TAG held its first webinar on AI, and we've held a number of those since. The framework really comes out of those observations and those insights and those questions. What is AI, and why does it matter, and how can our organization use AI to become more efficient? What does ethical AI look like, and what would a policy be in order to ensure that it can happen safely and effectively within our sector? And how do we ensure that AI doesn't undo the decades of work that the nonprofit and philanthropic communities have worked to try to address inequities within our communities, or undo decades of the justice work that has happened? So it's from those questions and recognizing that this is an evolving landscape and these decisions are difficult to travel through. And so we wanted to make sure that we were meeting people where they're at. AI is not new, and Sarah will go into a little overview to sort of differentiate between what we're talking about here. Mainstream tools like ChatGPT have certainly evolved the conversation really quickly, and people are, what we've found is there's an appetite to learn more and to understand how to do this in a way that meets the missions and the visions we have for our own organizations. We also recognize, and I want to call this out, and we can put these resources in the chat as well, that there are a number of frameworks out there already. So the Partnership on AI's Guidance for Safe Foundational Model Development That is a model out there. Responsible AI commitments that has been put together by RR Labs. There's principles that have been developed by Microsoft, and even Project Evident has got a framework as well. These are all complementary, and I'll let Sarah talk about hers if she so chooses. But we wanted to, with this framework, provide people a starting place with some tactical guidance about how to use and experiment with AI. So Sarah, you want to talk about the design principles?
So as Jean was saying, the world has changed dramatically in the last year when we began this project to develop a framework to help foundations really be practical and tactical around their engagement with AI. At the time, about a year ago, most of the frameworks that existed were pretty high level. They were values-based frameworks, principles-based frameworks, but they weren't really on the brass tacks. And what the TAG membership was hearing and what we were hearing from our foundation friends and grantmaker friends was that they really needed something that was more practical. And so we had the benefit, the pleasure of working with a number of people in the TAG membership community. We were able to assemble a 5-person steering committee that helped us design the overall project. And then we had a 20-person design committee that worked with us over 3 different, 2 or 3 hour sessions where we worked in big Miro boards as we collaborated on what was important, what were people facing, and what were the challenges and the questions and the opportunities people really felt like that they were facing around AI. The way we centered all of those conversations was using a series of design principles. And what was very clear to us at the beginning is that we wanted to make sure that whatever was developed was going to center equity at its core. We wanted a very collaborative approach. This was not going to be a framework that was developed in a closet and then sort of released. It really had to be a for us, by us approach. And Jean will talk about that a little bit more. We wanted to make sure we had some cross-team collaboration. So it wasn't just foundation CTOs that were in the room, but we wanted to make sure we had some program officers, we had some practitioners or nonprofits, we had tech leaders. So each of these groups had a mixture of perspectives so that we had the benefit of those shared perspectives in developing a framework. We really wanted to empower technology executives to lead strategic conversations around AI inside of foundations. We really felt like it had been a disservice for technology professionals inside of foundations. They weren't always at the kind of strategy table. They weren't always in those conversations. But we knew that AI was forcing a whole set of conversations, or was going to force a whole set of conversations inside of foundations that were profoundly strategic, both around mission attainment as well as around culture and norms inside of the foundation. And it was really important that we wanted to make sure that technology executives weren't just kind of in the box of thumbs up, thumbs down the technology, but really helping to facilitate a broader conversation about strategy and implications for AI usage. Obviously, we want to promote privacy, security, and transparency. And along with community IT, it was really important to us that this was technology brand and product neutral. A lot of the activity, a lot of the kind of the first movers out of the gate around AI usage in the social sector, not surprisingly, Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, we could not possibly do our work without their incredible investments in technology. And yet, when they engage with our sector, and they only do it from the perspective of sort of brand halo or creating market for their product, we feel like that somewhat limits our conversation. So we wanted to make sure that we are creating a much broader brand neutral conversation. So let me pause there and Jean talk about the for us, by us big tent.
Absolutely. So these are actually some photos from that big tent. So back in November 2023 at the TAG annual conference, we held a 90-minute workshop with about 300 people in a huge big ballroom where they brought in real world use cases and then used the framework to evaluate what responsible adoption would look like in their own organizations and what would the steps be in order to do that. So that was an opportunity for us to get feedback about like how this might work with a variety of different perspectives and use cases. And so that was a very informative piece. Sarah was facilitating that, and I was the incoming executive director at that point. I had not yet joined the TAG team, and so I was really heartened by the community spirit and the way in which people were generously giving their time and their experience in order to make this a useful tool.
I'll only just add to what Jean was saying is that it's hard to overstate the amount of change to the framework from that workshop. I mean, it was just the level of insight and input that was given to us so generously by that community. It really dramatically shifted what the emphasis was in the framework. So thank you for those of you who are involved. So just quickly, what is AI? Just to make sure we're all talking about the same things. If you wouldn't mind advancing me just one. So just straight up, what might be called narrow AI, traditional AI. It's the capacity of a computer to mimic human cognitive functions, such as learning and problem-solving functions. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of what that looks like. That has been around for decades, for 30 years, and it certainly has shaped your life as a consumer directly for probably the last 10 years at least. So everything from Netflix to Alexa to just about every way that you interact with a consumer-based company has some form of AI in order to expedite the way that they're interacting with you or to more closely serve your needs. And in their case, that's to sell you more product. That's a little bit different from where all of the heat and light has been since November of 2022, when ChatGPT-3 was released into the public. And that's generative AI. And so generative AI is the capacity of a computer system to create things that seem like they're new, whether that's new text, new audio, new video, new sounds, new pictures, all of it. And it uses massive amount of data as training data so that when somebody queries or makes a response or a request, it can create something that appears to be new, but of course it's based on all of the learning underneath that, all the data that's been used for training. Let me actually give you some examples because that will probably make it more clear for folks. So I want to talk about some common machine learning applications and then give you one example from the generative AI space. So predictive analytics. So this is something that most consumer-based companies are using. Famously, Target used predictive analytics to get a sense of if they could understand which of their customers were likely to be pregnant before they were buying diapers. They wanted to understand who they were and the period of time where they were going to acquire a lot of new product. And they realized that if you bought a combination of about 27 different products, and that was through analyzing tons and tons of data, they would predict with strong accuracy that you were pregnant, and then they could offer you coupons and other ways to help gain a share of your wallet. The way we've seen some nonprofits using predictive analytics is to really move away from a one-size-fits-all program model to be able to narrow in on adapting their program model and customizing it to different subgroups that were within their client populations that they may not understand are actually subgroups. So Gemma Services, they are focused on working with young girls that need inpatient mental health support. They work with about 250 girls a year. They were interested in whether or not they could tailor their program to subgroups, but they weren't sure what those subgroups would be. And using predictive analytics, they were able to identify, in fact, yes, there were subgroups. There were some people that elements of their program model were more important versus less important. And they were then able to begin customizing the way that the program model was being fit to each girl who came through the program. After a year, I think this is the 2022 data, they found that they could lower the risk score for girls, and that acuity score was about whether or not you'd show back up in the emergency room or come back to the program after discharge. They lowered that almost by 100%. And they decreased the stay in their inpatient facility by just under 3 months. So really dramatic outcomes when they can move away from a one-size-fits-all program model and really focus on those predictive analytics. similar to target dramatic outcomes when they can understand subgroups of their customers and better tailor their offerings to those customers. Another form of sort of traditional or narrow form AI would be recommendation engines. You're familiar with this with Netflix, let's say, who is helping to make a complex decision about what you might want to watch tonight, from hundreds of thousands of options into offering you ones that are more likely of interest to you based on your taste, but also in the taste of subgroups that are similar to you. An organization that is using recommendation engines is a group called Smart Money. The challenge that they're working on is about 46% of Americans live in families with insufficient income to meet their basic needs. So they're interested in doing two things. They want to connect people to basic goods and services, and so get them aligned with government programs and other programs that can support the family's economic well-being. They also want to reconnect them into the democratic process. So many people feel like, what does government do for me? And so they're trying to both connect them to services, but also get them connected to local politics to understand how tax dollars are being spent in ways that really support the way they live. So that recommendation engine is connecting clients to social services. And so making strong recommendations of ones that would most likely be a good fit, and then supporting in the application of those services. And then following up with keeping them connected via text messaging to the overall democratic process. The natural language processing. So this is the technology that underpins Alexa, Hey Google, et cetera, Hey Siri. Natural language processing is being used by a education nonprofit called Talking Points. They are focused on how do you increase that connection between families of young students and teachers. There's a wealth of scientific data that shows that the stronger relationship between teachers and families, the better the academic outcomes for students. What they have done is created a much more sophisticated translation software. They can translate over 145 languages now. So you can do real-time texting back and forth between families and teachers. And what they found after using this technology is they decreased absenteeism, particularly for marginalized populations, by over 10%. And they increased academic gains in math and English language arts, again, for disadvantaged populations, over 10%. So significant shifts there. And what they're looking to do now is to test, what does nudging look like? Because it's not every interaction between a family and a teacher that's going to result in a better outcome for a student. It's more likely if that is a less transactional, so-and-so forgot their lunch versus so-and-so had a death in the family, or so-and-so is really struggling with math. And so they're going to experiment what it looks like when they do prompting or nudging to encourage teachers and families to have these types of communications. So these are all types of technology that are narrow form AI. They've been around for a long time. There are, frankly, less risks associated with these types of algorithms because they are more narrowly construed. And they've been on the market for a lot longer. So we've had a clear understanding of how they're working and where some of the risks and edges are. Generative AI is, again, the newer technology that has been commercialized. We have fewer nonprofits who are using Gen AI only because it's incredibly expensive still. One organization that is, whenever I use my example for Siri, my phone turns on. So Crisis Text Line is they are a national text-based crisis service for people who are in crisis, similar to a crisis hotline. And they were really struggling with the challenge of how do we prepare our volunteers? They go through a 30-hour training program, but they were noticing that some that came out of the training program were not fully getting onto the platform and really supporting, being peer counselors to folks in crisis. They lacked confidence in their own skills. So Crisis Text Line created a simulation environment using generative AI. They wrote their own stories because they don't have access to the texts that go back and forth from live texters and their peer counselors. That's protected information. So they created sort of similar texts based on their experience of working in those exchanges. They use that data then to train a generative AI model. And then that became a volunteer training model. And so I can come into that model, and each time I go in and start a new interaction with either somebody who is low risk or high risk, so that'd be somebody who is at risk of self-harm, or somebody who is depressed or anxious or sad, but is not at a risk for self-harm. And as a volunteer, I can use that model to practice my text exchanging and to gain comfort. So they're still in piloting mode with this, but their hope is that this will reduce the loss, the yield loss of folks who are going through their volunteer program, but not becoming full members of the platform to be able to support their peers in crisis. So that's sort of a wealth of examples that you can see that's happening across the nonprofit sector. And I'm happy to share, once we get further into this, some examples from the philanthropic sector as well.
Thank you, Sarah. That's an excellent grounding. So now we've seen different applications of AI as a frame to hang our knowledge on. We've identified a number of ways AI is being used in philanthropy, and I would argue that this is also being used in the nonprofit sector too, in these ways. So individual use cases are when a staff or a various stakeholder at an organization is using publicly available AI tools that may not be provisioned by the organization itself. So using ChatGPT to generate correspondence, for example, is an individual use case. With regards to organizational efficiencies, these are the kinds of tools that have been provisioned by your organization, and they're usually found in your tech stack or within your existing technical applications. So they're used to save time and use that predictive analytics and improve the efficiencies of the organization. So it could be the AI tools in Copilot in your Microsoft stack, or it could be something like turning on the AI companion in Zoom in order to take meeting transcriptions. Mission attainment are tools that have been provisioned by the organization for that deeper discovery, those deeper insights, to help with identifying strategies for fundraising or analyzing impact and those sorts of things. And then the nonprofit enablement, we put this here because at TAG, we speak largely to funders, and we recognize that funders are in a position, and they should be in a position, to support and enable their own nonprofit partners with the adoption of AI as well. I think this framework is applicable for both audiences because it is a starting point and gives you considerations that could be tailored to your own organizational context. I'm going to pass the baton back to Sarah to go into deeper. Oh, there's a poll. Sorry.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to break in and say your timing is perfect. We're right on track. And yeah, thank you for making that connection between people who are working in nonprofits and nonprofit mission, and foundations and funder missions that are supporting their nonprofits. So I think there's a lot that is definitely in common. But we wanted to get people at this point, now that you just saw that that example, could you please fill in our poll on what are you using AI for at your organization? So this is multiple choice. You can fill in as many as apply. So the first option is individual use. So that's what Jean was just mentioning, like you or staff are using, ChatGPT or other AI tools that you go out and just use on your own. Organizational use may be AI embedded in a tool that you use, like Teams, or it could be AI that the organization, like it's a specific tool that you use within your organization that uses AI. It could be not applicable. You're not at an organization, or it just doesn't apply for some reason, or some other way that you're using AI. And I think, Jean, that would encompass people whose organizations are using AI related to some of the examples that Sarah just gave us, where you're achieving part of your mission, or more enabling your mission by using AI to do this kind of additional work, or limit the resource, because you have limited resources, limiting who you're spending those resources on using some AI tools. So, and if you are doing something in that realm, if you could put that in the chat, we would love to hear more from you about what your organization is doing. Jean, if you would mind reading the responses for people who may be not able to see.
Sure, thank you. Yes. So what ways do you use AI? And we're actually, this is mimicking, because we've talked to hundreds of organizations, and some of this is tracking what we were already hearing, that most use is in the individual space. And so 76 respondents here, 76% of the respondents responded that individual use is the way in which they're using AI, with 35% organizational, 18% not applicable, and 2% other, which is interesting.
And we have some great, couple of great questions in the chat. So someone says they're feeling a little FOMO,
Yeah.
fear of missing out on AI. And I feel like we've talked about this in some other context as well, but with it changing so rapidly, and if you remember back to when Alexa, or I'm sorry, Sarah, Siri was first out there and it didn't work at all. Like you would ask it to do something and it completely misunderstood you. So I feel like there's not a huge drawback to waiting. If you're like kind of still getting together how you would use this, the tools are going to be different and they're going to be better in even just a year. So don't feel FOMO that it's going to get away from you. But if you are interested in it, like starting now, coming to this webinar and using other resources to learn as much as you can about it as you kind of get ready to use it, I think is a good idea. And there were a couple of other things in here, a pilot group using ChatGPT and Copilot. Using AI for the first time this week for marketing copy for free resources and webinars. Like that's a great use case, right? Saves you some time. Would like to learn what other, what tools are being used to do things like summarizing information, not a single document, but collections, summarizing applications and reports. All of those are great use cases that I'm sure Jean, you and Sarah have seen, and just wanting to hear more in general. So yeah, just a bunch of different people putting in the chat. If you are using it, don't feel like now that I've stopped sharing the poll that you still have time to put stuff in the chat, and we'd love to hear that. And again, if we can't get to everything, we're going to include a lot of this in the transcript. So look for that and go to the next slide, which I believe is Sarah.
Individual use. This is where your organization has the least amount of control, right? ChatGPT is available. You don't have control over whether or not your potential grantees are using ChatGPT or Grantable. You also don't have control whether or not your employees potentially are using that as well. So Otter AI or other transcription services, that's a big thing that came up when we were doing that large 300-person conversation around the framework. We asked people for how AI was coming into their world. So transcription services and the ability to use generative AI to generate copy. Those were two things that were coming up quite a bit. When we move to the organizational efficiency, again, it's those transcriptions and summary services in a Zoom account. So that might be unlike Firefly or Otter that somebody can just send individually. These are tools that you're provisioning, that your technology team has paid for, has turned on. I think this is an interesting place because right now you have a little more control over this than you will in the future, right? Because these are new features that are likely available to you through some of your technology providers that are in your tech stack. And increasingly, they will be standard features that are in your tech stack that you cannot turn on or turn off. So, right now, Zoom, you can turn on and turn off. AI features in grants management software, those are upsells if you're in Flux or Submittable. But, I would expect in the future, the AI will just be a core part of the software. And deploying Microsoft Copilot, that was just raised recently. Right now that's a pretty significant upcharge. I think it's like 100 plus per seat right now. But I would imagine that price will come down as others offer similar products. And maybe eventually it'll simply be a part of the core product and there'll be something else new and shiny that is an additional charge. Finally, if we look at mission attainment, this is around how do you really support grant making decisions or to find grant making bias, right? That was one of the big things that folks were interested in, is how do I get better at choosing where I should be funding my money, or understand where bias is happening in my grant making selections already. Enabling measurement, learning, and evaluation, MEL. How do I do that much more broadly across my organization and have it really at the fingertips of folks who are making decisions? Can I use it to analyze a theory of change and to understand gaps and errors? Landscape analysis. I want to do funding in a new area, or even an area I know well, but can this technology be used to help me understand the landscape? And universal internal search on prior grants and reports. And I did mention earlier that I talk a little bit about where I've seen some foundations playing, and the Emerson Foundation has basically gotten rid of their intranet. So the internal way that employees can search for information about their company and their benefits, et cetera, that is now all being handled by generative AI. That's phase one. And phase two is they're moving all the grants and the grantee reports into that area. And they see it as a way of being able to summarize past knowledge of the foundation very quickly, so that folks can have access to it immediately and be well equipped to be in dialogue with community, which is really where they want their program officers to be. So I'll pause there and hand it back to Jean.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a great sort of overview and the ways in which AI is being used. So fear not if you're feeling a bit FOMO. It's fine to be where you're at right now. We're all in a space of discovery and learning and trying to figure out what is the best way forward. And that's why I'm excited to share this framework, because I think that this is a great place to start. So regardless of your usage, whether you are an individual user, an organizational mission attainment, or you're thinking about funding a nonprofit enablement, AI adoptions really need to, in order to be responsible, need to address some important considerations as part of their decision-making process and their journey. The framework here that you see has got 3 buckets of considerations, and we'll go into deeper detail on each of those: ethical, organizational, and technical. And I will say that these sorts of considerations cannot be handled in an isolation or in a vacuum. They're an opportunity for members across your organization to come together and address these considerations within your organizational context. And at the heart of each of these is to do it responsibly, to do it ethically, is to center the needs of people and think about these considerations in alignment to your organizational values. I cannot understate this enough. We are on an AI journey. We're at the very, very beginning of that journey, and this is going to be a process. This is not like a one and done where you've tested it and you've deployed it and it's over. These things will get better with time, and also too, your needs will evolve with time. So as you think about this, everything should be human-centered, listening to your key stakeholders throughout the considerations, making sure that you have, diverse voices around there, so you're considering the implications within your context. And so, thinking about an iteration around a pilot that can help sort of bring those various stakeholders in and do that feedback and such. I think if you click through, I wanted to just to give you a real world example of some accessibility. So the colors on this framework were selected to ensure that the maximum amount of people could see it. And so, recognizing that almost 5% of the population is colorblind, we selected this color palette to make sure that our technology and our tools meet the needs of the most amount of people possible. And that's one way you can think about it, centering humans, is through the accessibility lens.
Great. So I'll walk through the elements of how you think about applying. There's more detail in the document that we've linked to really help you get started. But as Jean was saying, everything should be human-centered. And so we'd like you to really begin by thinking about organizational considerations. finding early adopters. We have some questions about change management. Adopting AI is no different than any other type of significant change that you are managing throughout your organization. And we've all certainly had to manage a lot of change over the last 5 years. But thinking about who are your early adopters, do you already have a group of folks who are sort of always on the cutting edge of technology? How do you bring those in to really be the sort of champions of experimenting with AI and then talking about AI with their colleagues? Really creating a strong two-way learning process. This is not something that your technology team is going to do off in a dark closet by themselves. They really have to be in strong two-way engagement with the staff. Really incorporating staff and where reasonable grantees in tool selection. So one of the organizations I didn't talk about was a foster care youth organization that was using precision analytics, and they had foster youth who were on their design committee. So really thinking about human-centered design, how do you have edge users, the folks who are likely most impacted by the system? How do you have them be part of the designing of the system? Internal discussions to really inform policy and practice. You likely already have a data governance policy and a privacy policy on inside your organization. Really pulling those out, dusting them off, seeing whether or not they are go far enough for you based on where AI is today, because they were probably written in a pre-AI time. Or not considering AI, and how are you circulating and engaging your team on those policies? We encourage people to think about data governance and data privacy like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. That is not one and done activity inside of your organization, nor should privacy and data governance be one and done either. You should consider those as an always on education and reinforcement opportunity. Assess how AI will evolve or sit within your mission, and then build internal communications. Again, we're on this journey, as Jean is saying. It's not going to be static. And so thinking about what is the internal education and communication you want to be using to make sure that everyone's staying with you on this journey. Around ethical considerations, and interestingly, when we talk to people about where you notice that this is a circle graphic, you can start anywhere. We think that either you should start on the engaging people, or you start on the ethical considerations. So those are sort of equally important in terms of where you could start. There are, we really encourage people to not try and sanction AI. AI, it's like the internet. It is not a winning strategy to yell at the ocean and tell the tide to stop rising. Like that is not going to be a winning strategy. It might buy you a little bit of time, but as we already said, there's AI that's happening that's outside of your control. It's better to engage on this initially, but be mindful about how data should be collected and stored. So thinking about how your data is being collected, thinking about the fact that you have access to and are storing likely lots of data from communities, because that's the data that's coming to you through grantees. And so being really mindful about how that's being stored and how it's being used inside of your organization. Adapting that data governance policy if it needs to be adapted. Setting policy for notifying people when AI is being used. When am I talking to a human? When am I talking to a bot? Is my grant being reviewed by a bot before it's getting to a human? Understanding of how AI is being used. Creating the ability for folks to opt out, and ensuring human accuracy checks. I mean, we don't have enough time in this webinar to go through the myriad of ways we have been shown that technology in general and AI in particular can fail communities of color, marginalized communities. And so making sure that you have human accuracy checks that are built into however you're using AI. And enabling people to request a manual review of AI. And to share back that generated output. So these are all considerations that were shared by your colleagues and prioritized by them as ways that you can think about privacy, bias, and transparency and how to guard against it, and responsibility and acceptable usage.
So technical considerations are really, really is the last conversation that you should be having. I know I'm saying this as someone who is representing the technology space within philanthropy, But a lot of these challenges are not technical challenges per se. They are also human challenges. And that is the hardest part and the place where you should start. So when you think about the technical considerations, you want to make sure you understand the platform that you're using and what kinds of data privacy and security and biases are built into the model. You want to also understand what are the risks in place. And that is really important. I know that there's a question up here about the Emerson Collective example that Sarah used. ChatGPT uses a large language model that scrapes a lot of data from a lot of places, out there in public. In terms of the Emerson Collective, it's a closed large language model. So that little box here, this idea of a private LLM, that is your data only. So you're going to be able to control data much better, rather than putting sensitive data on a third-party platform that can end up into the learning model. With regards to other technical considerations, you're going to want to work with a diverse group of folks who can help identify low-hanging fruits where you can adopt AI. Think about the things that that are ready for automation, that are really transactional. That's a really good place to start, as opposed to something that is really core to your mission. That'll be a good place to experiment and understand what the edges are, and also to increase the tech influency within your staff. With all of these tools, there is a learning curve in order to use them. And so you're going to have to practice, and you're going to have to, allow people to incorporate change in a natural way, because there's a learning curve here. And then you want to make sure that there's some oversight and ways in which you can evaluate that. So yeah, just to underscore, Sarah recommended starting at the top of that circle. And being able to have a conversation about what your AI vision is, and centering people in that conversation, exploring those ethical considerations before you move on to tools and platforms and those sorts of things.
And I think the good news is we are at the end, and now is really the opportunity to be able to engage with questions that have been coming in, and this phenomenal chat stream that's been happening this whole time.
Yes. So we recognize that this framework is really just a starting point. And then I just want to underscore that you can find more information on tagtech.org/AI. And we strongly believe that our sector has a duty to really balance the potential of AI with the risks, and to make sure that we adopt it in alignment to our values. That is key. Our commitment to the work that we do remains centered on our missions for a more just, equitable, and peaceful world. And it's the genie's out of the bottle on AI. It's here. So it's our opportunity to embrace this with informed optimism, to make sure that AI adoption is human-centered, prevents harm, mitigates those risks. We do it in a way that is iterative, that pays attention to the change journey that everyone's on. And then I think the most important question you should ask yourself is when AI isn't the answer. Just because you buy a hammer doesn't mean everything is a nail. And so you really have to ask yourself, is this the best way to solve this challenge? Because it may not be.
Great. You guys did a wonderful job on time, and I am also loving the chat. It's just amazing to see people sharing resources with each other and answering each other's questions. I want to reiterate, I don't think we're going to get to every question, but I am going to put as much as I can into our transcript of our talk today. And so I'll hopefully get Jean and Sarah to weigh in and give us some answers on those as well. But we do have a couple of questions that came in that I thought were interesting. And one was, what kind of organizational policies do you recommend? And also, do you recommend having an organizational AI policy before implementing the framework?
Great questions. I think certainly an AI usage policy is something organizations need to take up soon, and it's okay to draft that before you have implemented. You may need to evolve it and revisit it as you go down the journey. Sarah also mentioned your data governance framework and your data governance policy. I think that both of these things is writing the policy is not enough. You have to think about how to create that policy, create it collaboratively, and then how are you going to roll it out and socialize it so people have the training and the knowledge in order to, to address the policy. As
I
far
wanted
as
to just jump in and say, yeah, like you may already have like data policies, but if they haven't been revised in the last year, and definitely, if they haven't been revised longer ago than that, like you might have a starting place already. So if you ask around in your organization, you may not have to start from scratch around your data policy. You may have something in there and you have to add in these AI considerations to it.
Yeah, and thank you, Carolyn, for sharing your policy template.
Yeah, we have an acceptable use policy, just a template, a place to start from, but that's available for free on our site. But that doesn't address like all of these other policies, like who has access to your data and the different departments' data, right? If you're going to start using AI to query your documents, like are there some HR documents in there that aren't supposed to be in there, that sort of thing. You're going to want to have those policies in place for that. I love this question about, it's probably true for any new technology, but how do you introduce AI to staff that might be afraid of it or have no idea where to start?
I feel like don't look at AI differently than you thought about maybe education and evolution you want to have in a new organization around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Think about what I hope was a comprehensive plan that you took in place, the time you gave, the folks you felt like could be exemplars of where you wanted your culture to be, of what you wanted your norms to be, and how you involved them in the development and the championing of those changes. And that has nothing to do with title, by the way. That has to do with who's a culture carrier inside of your organization. There are lots of different models out there around change management, but you've all been leading change for pretty dramatically for the last 5 years, if not before that. And so I encourage you to think about those early adopters. I encourage you to not think about title and to think about, who holds informal authority as well as formal authority in your organization. And what are the ways that you can get people comfortable with AI through examples and the fact that people might not understand that Netflix is a recommendation engine, but most people have used Netflix. Most people have been on Amazon's website and it's offered them other products. So, when we talk about AI, it's not entirely foreign to folks, but it's helping do the translation of what could a recommendation engine like Netflix mean for us inside of the problems that we're trying to solve. And again, I think as Jean said, like, you do not want to be the hammer looking for, assuming that everything's a nail. So helpful for you as an organization to raise, what are the persistent barriers or challenges we face in achieving our mission? And then really understanding, well, is AI something that could help us with some of these barriers? Or frankly, is there something else we could do that would be far less expensive? And a fairly easy example, and Jean's heard me do this as a go-to before, is, there are lots of tools that are now available that use AI to support grantees on writing grant applications. Grantable is one of them. There are more and more grants management systems that are providing an AI additional tool to help you summarize grants, process grants, et cetera, et cetera. If the problem that you were trying to solve is that the grant process is too onerous, the transaction costs are too high, both for grantees and for program officers, putting AI on both sides of that process is a really expensive way to solve that problem. If the problem was the grant process was too onerous, you could change the process. You didn't have to bring AI on both sides of that problem. So I really encourage people to be thoughtful about, there could be less expensive, less invasive, easier to design solutions to your challenges, or it could be that AI would be a tremendous opportunity, but have it be a problem-focused conversation, not a technology-focused conversation. Technology is the means to the end.
I
but it's
love that. I love that framing of it. I'm sorry to cut you out. I want to be mindful of people's time, and just, I think we hit these learning objectives, and I hope you feel that we did too. Learning about AI and generative AI. Thank you so much for walking us through those differences and then giving us these amazing use cases and examples. I think that's really helpful to help pull it all together. The framework, design principles, and the ways AI is being used in philanthropy and nonprofits. And then, of course, that amazing graphic that helps you really think through those three different aspects and the different aspects within those aspects around using AI and where to start from. I want to remind people that that framework is available for download on the site, and we'll share that in the transcript. It was shared in the chat already. Thank you so much for joining us today. I loved the chat. I loved your interaction. Thank you, Jean and Sarah, for just taking us through all of this, the thinking that you've been doing, and the framework that you've come up with from this, the practitioners in general. A reassurance to everyone who was asking about the chat and the questions, the ones we didn't get to, and all of those great resources in the chat. I will be sharing as much as I can in the transcript, so that will be posted within a week or so. So look back there. But thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Jean and Sarah, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.